And David is online, so we're good to go. Hello, David.
Hey, I'm here.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And Ashley, if you do a roll call, please, ma'am.
Here, Tom Farrell.
Here.
Brooke Brown.
Here.
Ryan Clinton.
Here.
Wallace Grainer.
Here.
And David Smith.
Here.
We also have Development Services Director Carrie Kaler, as well as Sean Garrettson from Pegasus.
Right. Thank you all very much. Next item I have is the public comments. This is citizens wishing to address the comprehensive plan strike force for items not on the agenda will be received at this time. Do we have anybody that would like to address us on an item not on the agenda? And let's see if I can do this.
This time there are no hands raised.
Great. Okay, good. So we will go ahead and start on our item number 2 is discussion and possible action on the minutes from the August the 2nd, 2021 meeting. And again, on this, if we need to, we'll go ahead and entertain a motion and then we'll accept these. But if somebody wants to come back at a later time after they've had a better chance to review them and make some edits.
Move to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Raleigh. We have a second.
Okay.
We have a second discussion and not seeing any hands. So if you would just leave your hand down. If you're in favor, raise your hand if you're opposed or want to make any adjustments. And I don't see any, so that motion carries. Item number 3 is discussion and possible action to review and approve elements of the comprehensive plan. Sean, I'm going to let you take that and see what you have available, if anything, on that.
Sure. So the first item that I think is under this agenda is the Parks and Recreation chapter. We had sent the drafts of both the Parks and Recreation and the Facilities chapter out to the city, and I think it's in your packet here. So as you guys had all discussed, this is really a summation of what is already in the Parks and Recreation plan. It's just, in a comprehensive plan, it should be a central location for all policies related to everything, whether or not it's mobility or future land use or Parks and Rec. So it's 6 pages. I can go through it. Or are there any comments? We can kind of just.
Well, the one we had at our last meeting, I had, and then we had talked about, and I'm going to have Bowie work on both the comprehensive plan and the infrastructure and utility plan, because we had some changes and we wanted to make sure that they included those. So Sean, I'm going to let them, they're going to edit some of this for us too on that. And we won't have that today. We'll have it next Monday. So I'm going to go ahead and just ask that we table these 2 items right now until we get their comments too, because they had some changes that we were going to do.
Okay.
We'll do that. So are there any other, do you have anything else on that, or we want to kind of just give us an update on the land use deal, if you would, on that, because I think y'all are working on that, although Kathy probably has not had time to complete that by now.
Yeah,
started on it.
Right. So we're, in each of these weeks, we're providing new chapters, and then we're also editing previous chapters you guys have given us feedback on. And so the current land use, we had gone through that one, as well as the community profile. And I think we're just waiting on a little bit of feedback from the city on the current land use map. On the community profile, we're going through those edits. The city confirmed today the census data, by the way, for Rollingwood The newer census data is not going to be available until September or October. So there is some updated 2019 data. And so the city's indicated and suggested to us to go ahead and update any of the census data that's in the community profile to 2019 data. That's pretty much the only updates that we have. The other thing, Tom, is we are working on the future land use plan, and we got the memo that Brooke had sent, and then Tom went ahead and prepared a couple of different things for me, which I think was a summation of what you guys had talked about. And then Ashley also sent me links to the meeting minutes. And so we're kind of going through all of that to create a chapter for future land use, and should have that. Tom, I'd like to send that to you probably by the end of the day tomorrow or early Wednesday
Right.
morning.
And we'll get it out to everybody. If you would just send it to Ashley and she'll get it to me on that.
Okay.
I would say on the map, I met with the city on our map, and there was an issue that the map we have indicates to be, there's a couple of things on it. It's marked as a draft map, and I think the city would prefer to keep that as a draft document until two things have happened. One is there are some, we did discover one piece of property that was in Rolling Wood that was not on our map. We're making that kind of it's one residential lot. And the other issues is we have, Rolling Wood may or may not have another piece of property that is not showing up on our map. That has not been defined yet. And that may take quite a while to be defined on that.
Okay.
So I think what we should do, if our task force is okay with it, we just use the map that we have, which is the map that shows as a draft for right now, and go with that.
That's the draft 2018 map?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
And the only again, the city wants to make sure they keep their options open in regard to being able to, if we have the ability to acquire another property that we did not, that currently shows up in the city of Austin, then we would probably be we'd probably be better just to keep that as a draft until we kind of finalize our position on that as a city.
To be a lawyer here, you don't want to inadvertently create an estoppel issue.
Being one of the few non-attorneys here, I accept all that. I just know that they want to keep all that deal. The census data, I think that I had talked to the city, and the city had indicated we wanted to go ahead and use the latest data we have available now, which is a 2019 estimate. And let me emphasize, that is the estimate that came out, isn't it, Sean? It's not the final numbers.
That's right.
And what I am being told is that while October is a goal month to put that out, it could be the end of the year, even the spring, before we get the final data on 2020. I wouldn't anticipate there being a terrible amount of change on that and let me, Sean, I can't recall if you were on the last in our last meeting. I think you were.
I was, yeah.
But we do want to put that caveat on there in regard to the number of houses. We want to put a footnote somewhere in there that explains why we had a decrease in the number of residences that we had in the city of Rolling Wood. And that would be that we have vacant lots, we have houses under construction. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we talked about on that, but I do want to make sure we put that in there. That would I'm afraid that would, if we have that, it's going to raise a red flag on the bond people, and we still need to, I think we could explain it, but still no use raising that if we don't have to do that.
Right.
So, any other comments or questions on Sean? And I'm not seeing any, so we'll go ahead and, Sean, do you have anything else?
No.
Good. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action on our single family and residential. In looking through the, if I can grab that real quick, in looking through our survey, the only thing that I saw, and please feel free to jump in if somebody sees anything different than that. The 2 things that stood out to me that our residents wanted in this survey from our single family was, number 1, we did not have a consensus in regard to our estate lots. Most people, I think, felt like the estate lots were something that they probably did not want to see in Rollingwood. So, Ryan, I know you've looked at this survey probably more than anybody, and Brooke. If y'all see anything different that stood out in regard to our single family, please kind of let me know what we have if I missed something. The other thing that I would emphasize is that when I reread the survey was that our residents wanted to protect our trees and make sure that we have an adequate tree canopy that they have on that. Keep our tree canopies the way they are. Keep rolling wood rather than just rolling. So those were the 2 things that I saw that stood out. I have a third that I have had a couple of people bring to my attention that I'll bring up. One is we have had fairly recently had a Board of Adjustment ruling that granted a variance to a property that bordered the city of Austin on the rear setback. Now, I happen to board the city of Austin and Westlake Hills, and city of Austin allows building up to 5 feet from the property line. Westlake Hills, I'm not sure about, but I can tell you the house that borders me in Westlake Hills actually has a building that's on the property line. It's in the public utility easement, if there is one there. It should be. Yes, sir.
30-foot setback as of 2008 in Westlake Hills, rear yard.
Yeah. So we have a number of our residents that border, the one I'm particularly talking about borders the city of Austin, and that's a 5 foot. Because we have some houses going up behind us that are 5 foot from that. The risk that I see when we do this, if we decide that that's something we want to dwell on, is that it would increase the building area for a larger house. And many of our residents, not a majority, but many of our residents responded that they are concerned about the size of houses being built in Rollingwood. So from my standpoint, I'm not in favor, just personally, in increasing the buildable area for a house in Rollingwood. But if as a way for a residence to put in an accessory building or pool or something like that in that rear setback that borders the city of Austin, I don't think that would offend me if it did not increase the main house building size that would be allowed on the lot. I'm not sure how to word that. Now, that's one option for us to look at. The other is just to say, okay, if the Board of Adjustment is looking at this from a standpoint of allowing variances where you border the city of Austin, then we just leave it at that and let the Board of Adjustment take cases individually on that. And I'd just like to get the committee's input on what their thoughts are on that. So that's where I'm at. So let me break that down a little bit easier. Are there any other items that anybody has that when looking at the survey or comments that they've received in regard to single family houses other than the two that I went over?
This is Ryan.
Yes, sir.
I would just say that I think I don't have it all memorized. It's been a little while since I looked back at that part, but it might be, this may be inappropriate. It's up to you, but it might make sense to ask Bowie to summarize the
Single family.
yeah, the responses, because I do think there were things that were important. I think people were concerned about traffic. I think people were concerned.
Yes.
People did support, as my recollection is that people did support accessory dwellings. My recollection is that people did that it was either all or virtually all against short-term rentals. So there were a number of items that I think are worthy of inclusion in the report with respect to single family areas of town that did reflect a consensus view of the community. And I just think those things are worth putting in there as we've talked about in adding to the parks discussion and in adding to the city facilities discussion. There were some consensus views on a number of items. And since we did all that work, I think it's worth including a summary of them.
No problem. And you're exactly right. I actually had written down my accessory building deal on there, and I just didn't see it right away. But you're exactly right. And I have no problem whatsoever about doing that, to include those elements. Are there any other elements that are not survey related that people have received comments on that we want to try to address on single family? And I don't see any there. When we get to, I'm thinking, Ryan, that we have a separate chapter on traffic and mobility, since that was one of the major topics that I read in the survey, that we had a lot of people that were commenting on that. When I read back through it, the two that comes to mind right away is not only what we've talked about in regard to the pedestrian and bike friendly access to our commercial district, but they wanted crosswalks, and of course sidewalks always shows up. That's a different animal, I think. But the other part was we have wide enough streets on at places on Rollingwood Drive to put pedestrian refuge islands. I love that term. That would not only slow traffic, but provide a little safer access across the streets.
I agree with that. I think Sean has made this point, which he's right, which is that some of these discussions can end up in different chapters depending on how it's all written. There's a lot of crossover, but I agree that, again, it's my recollection, haven't looked at those results in a little bit, but it's my recollection that there was widespread support for some pedestrian crossing over Rollingwood Drive. I certainly, as a parent, would have very strong support for some sort of safe pedestrian crossing of Rollingwood Drive. And I think the community, it's very clear if you kind of look at it overall that the community wants a walkable, connected neighborhood. And one of the ways you can make a walkable, connected neighborhood is have a safe place for for kids to walk across the busiest street in the neighborhood that accesses the place where most of the kids want to go more than anywhere else in the neighborhood.
The, if I had to make a recommendation, and I've looked at this several times over the last several decades, is right at Edge Grove and Rollingwood Drive, and that we're planning on trying to recommend a pedestrian access down Edge Grove Drive to our commercial district. That would seem to me to be a reasonable place to put it. Are y'all familiar with when I use that term pedestrian refuge islands? That's a TxDOT term. They used that on BK's Road when they put those little concrete islands out in the middle of the road that supposedly if you're crossing BK's Road, you can stand on those and not get run over, which I wouldn't suggest anybody do, but that's what those are. And they can be landscaped, they can be, but they do slow down traffic. And that's been one of the issues that I think that did show up. Well, let me just get back to a main point here. Should we have, and Sean, jump in on this if you don't mind on the discussion, since mobility and traffic and access to our commercial district, I think was so important to our residents, should we have, rather than include that in a chapter, should we have that as a separate chapter?
It really is up to you. I've seen that done in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's definitely going to be some aspects of mobility in your future land use plan. We started to put some mentions of it in your infrastructure plan, but just based on what you're saying, it sounds like it's such a priority that probably deserves a separate chapter. It doesn't need to be, super long, but I think just articulating those points that you guys are bringing up.
Would our committee agree that should that, even though it's mentioned maybe more than once, should that be a separate chapter? I would prefer it to be a separate chapter just because I think it's one of the big issues that has been, it's been with us since I've been in Rollingwood. Let's put it that way. So that's 40 years of discussion on how to handle our traffic issues that we have on our streets on that. So
Would agree.
Brooke, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Agree that we ought to have it as a separate chapter.
Great.
Yeah.
So Sean, I'll work with you on that. You have the survey results that we did, and I think some of those are really good, but one of the things that will stand out is how we access and how we improve our pedestrian and bike and even golf cart access to our commercial district on that.
Okay. So,
right, we'll go along with that. So getting back to my last point, what's y'all's thoughts on the rear setbacks for properties that abut the city of Austin? Any thoughts? This is kind of a new one. I just had this come up, so I thought I would put that out there and just kind of get the feel of our commission.
I mean, from my perspective, I'm already starting to see some of the new houses that are being built on Ridgewood, and a couple of the new ones on Ridgewood, they're City of Austin, look like they're at least 10, maybe 5 feet from the back property lines. I'm not ready to say, I'm with you, Tom. I'm not ready to say, hey, yeah, main structure, let's allow it build up to 5 feet along the back property line. But, I don't really see an issue with it for an outbuilding or a swimming pool.
The only question, David, I have is, would that allow my concern is that would allow a bigger home to go on the lot from a planning standpoint. There could be some caveats that you could put a lot of conditions on that to make that work.
Yeah.
Generally, the question in my mind is whether you go, we take a stance on that, or do we just allow the Board of Adjustment to?
And I also checked real quick. This was a real quick look at the Westlake Hills ordinance. And the rear setback is dependent upon the size of the lot. For a lot that's 0.375 or less, it's 15 feet.
Okay,
Westlake Hills.
that's
So,
what it would be on Ridgewood.
yeah.
Is 15.
To kind of give you comparison. And then Wally's right for the larger lots. And I think it's like anything like an acre plus, it's 30 feet. So it's all kind of, staggered depending on the size of the lot. But that kind of gives you, I mean, it's, particularly when we're talking about things like outbuildings and also I'm admittedly thinking more of things more through the lens of additions as opposed to new construction. So that's why I'm kind of saying outbuilding or pool. I think 10 feet, or even if we made it 15 feet to line it up with Westlake Hills. I think that's fine when it comes to basically, letting a Rollingwood resident do what's commensurate with the city that it is adjoining.
Well, I think I guess the question is, do we want to take that on? Let's just ask now. I would think that would be a fair thing to talk about, but it's got to have some conditions on it that do not allow for larger homes to be built than they normally would be built on new construction.
And Tom, I'd like just the opportunity to look again at where properties abut City of Austin and what it would really mean before commenting.
Well, we have, that's certainly fine. We have basically the streets that abut the Zilker Clubhouse Road, the Stratford properties, and Ridgewood properties. And I would count the Tremont PUD it's not a PUD, but the Tremont small lot, the 24 lots over on Tremont that Rollingwood has, because they do abut Austin on one portion of it. It may affect one house there. And I think that's actually on the side rather than on the rear anyway. So it probably wouldn't affect them, come to think of it. But that's no problem if we come back on that. I'm going to put that on the next agenda and we'll kind of discuss it there, and we'll make sure everybody has an opportunity to look at that.
This is Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would just point out that, for me, I would want us to be careful not to create some odd incentive that the biggest places you can build lots on Rollingwood are adjacent to City of Austin, and all of a sudden everybody who lives on the other side of that street is unhappy because there are houses twice as big as theirs across the street. I mean, I just would want to think about the holistic view of I don't think this is what anybody's saying, but it seems to be like there's almost like a tit for tat. Well, they're building close to the property line, so we can too, instead of what is best for our community. What do we want as a community for the houses in our community?
And that is my concern about the size of the houses. But I think and one option, frankly, still goes back to the Board of Adjustment. One of the conditions that the Board of Adjustment has to find affirmatively on to grant a variance is that we're not giving this variance to someone that we wouldn't give to anybody else that asked for it that had similar circumstances. And Carrie, sorry, Brooke, go ahead.
About that too, it's hard to, in effect, create a different setback for lots that abut City of Austin, and what you can do in that setback versus what you can do in any other setback.
Yeah.
It becomes a bit arbitrary.
and that it may be that this is more of a can of worms and we want to take up on that, but that's something that I will give everybody a chance to digest that, think about it, and we'll talk about it on our next meeting if that's okay. So, Carrie, are you online with us?
Yes, sir.
Has it been more than, I know there's been at least one variance granted because they abutted the city of Austin on the rear setback.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I know that I've seen a couple, I'm not going to point, I'm not going to necessarily identify the properties, but I know that I've seen at least a couple of newer homes built that, you know, at least the swimming pool looks like it's a lot a lot more like 10 feet from a back property line than 20 feet, shall we say.
And it may be several that have been granted over the years. I think, Carrie, from while you've been here, how many, we've only had the one, have we not?
I believe so. I can only think of one. And then as far as pools go, the way we interpret the code is that the water line stops at the setback and the decking and coping can extend halfway. So 10 feet from the rear, 5 feet from the side, but the water stops at the
Carrie, did you say 20 feet from the rear?
Yes, the water line stops 20 feet from the rear. Correct.
Okay. That's an interesting interpretation, but I won't go with it. So, but us, we'll give some thought to that came up, and I thought I would at least put that out for discussion. And there are some negatives that we just have to make sure that we cover. I'm not as concerned about our existing residences as I am future building that might occur on that. And Ryan, you make a good point that it does create two classes of setbacks, and that's it may be better that we let the Board of Adjustment kind of make those determinations, because I don't have a way to word that in such a way that I'm comfortable with, that it's not going to give us a more of a problem than it's worth on that. So any other go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry. Wally. Oh, Wally's doing something else. Any other discussion on our single family? Okay, item number 5 is discussion regarding penalties for violations of the city's zoning code. And Diana, are you on here? I believe you are. Sure.
She was earlier, I think, but I don't see her on at the moment.
Okay, well, I had, she had brought this up and I had agreed that we would give a little briefing on it. So I'm gonna let Carrie, if you would. So if Carrie, if I violate the either the while I'm building a building, or if I fail to meet the covenants that we have in here, conditions as we go forward, what penalties do I face?
Sure. So if there's a violation, if there's an active building permit, let's say I come by the project and it's ongoing, maybe you're midway through the project and there's an issue, I can issue a stop work order. That's kind of the first step for me for active permits, issue stop work order until the issue's addressed. And then once it's addressed, I can lift the stop work order. If it's a situation where I'm having difficulty getting compliance, we will start citing, and I'm authorized to cite every day that the violation is existing. And that citation is up to $2,000 each day, and each day constitutes a separate offense. So those are the main arms of enforcement that I have. And then in a really unusual, extreme situation, let's say that I get to the end of a project and realize a violation has been made. I can not issue a certificate of occupancy until it's corrected. And then if it's something that has come up, no permit was ever issued for it, and somebody's occupying the structure, then I can, if proper notice has been given, let's say I've been citing, we haven't reached some sort of resolution that way, I can begin the process of revoking occupancy.
Okay. Well, let's go through, if you don't mind, Carrie, let's go through. It's not just, and I think Carrie does an extraordinarily good job of watching this stuff. If you drive around Rollingwood, you'll see Carrie out hands-on all the time. But if I'm building, one of the concerns has always been the height of both of a structure. And the city has a way, before you approve a plan, you have our engineers or our inspectors actually certified that it is meeting the height limit that we have for that building in that area and that zone. Is that correct?
Correct. So what we do is we do a comprehensive review of every set of plans that comes in before we issue the permit. There's a complicated metric by which we determine the point from which we're going to pull grade. It's the ordinance says above natural grade. Sometimes, rolling wood lots have a varied grade. So we do have a way of determining natural grade, what that point is. So we look at that. We look at the height of the building. They have to demonstrate in their plans that they're meeting those requirements. Then once a permit has been issued, I require form surveys for all foundation pours, and that form survey shows that height of where, how high that foundation is going to be poured, that it meets that same data point that was approved in the original plans. And then from there, they build, on top of that per plan. And so that's how we determine that. And things always look bigger when they're in the framing stage than when they are all walled in. We could go out and pull calculations if there's something that looks off. It doesn't look like it's being built per plan. That's really rare. If you've spent all this money getting these plans developed, going through this permitting process, you're building per plan, 98% of the time. But I could go out and have an inspector pull a height on site. And if it was in violation, I could stop work until that was corrected.
So let's go through, I think during construction, y'all, not only are you hands-on, we have the staff now to do that, but we have a third-party inspector, and we have our engineer that certifies the drainage and that sort of thing.
Correct.
So all of that has to be done. And so I finished the building, and before you issue a CO, do you get a backup? Do you get an approval from the engineer and the inspector that this has been built according to the plans that were submitted and all that?
Yeah, we could do a building final, which covers mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then the building itself. We also have the engineer come out and review for drainage. They're also the ones that perform the zoning review. And I'll back up and just kind of walk you through the intake process. When I get an application for new construction or addition, I take those plans, I send them to ATS, who performs our inspections for code, and I send them to K-Freeze. ATS reviews per the adopted building code. And then K-Freeze looks at the zoning and they look at the drainage. And then if there's a question as far as interpretation, then especially for zoning, then K-Freeze will come to me and say, hey, here's what we've got going on. We'd like an interpretation for this structure. Let's say where water tanks can be located on a property or whatnot. Gray area is kind of what I'm looking at. I do not require that a final as-built survey get completed. And that would be to determine whether a project has been built 100% to plan with no variation. That would be the only way to be dead on accurate. There's always going to be a half inch here or there, whether that's the foundation or where a planter box is or something. There's site conditions are a little bit different, but like I said, we review form surveys for pools, foundations, and driveways, which are the main areas where we're looking at setback. And so then we also look to make sure that any detention or drainage facilities are installed per plan.
Okay, so that's during construction, and I get my CO. Now we've added a couple of caveats that we're giving as ability to expand the impervious cover, and among those are that we're going to have drainage improvements, landscaping and landscape buffers, and in addition to a lighting provision. So let's say that I put these in and I redirect my lights for whatever reason. My maintenance guy takes off the little covers of the lights, and therefore I'm shining lights into my neighborhood. Or I don't maintain my drainage facility, or I don't do the landscaping buffer and maintaining of that landscaping buffer that was a condition of me getting greater impervious cover. What provisions can the city do to ensure that after construction we can go back and ensure that these items are taken care of and not be a problem for both the city and our residents?
Sure. So for landscaping, I inspect landscaping prior to signing off on a CO. Now, I haven't had, since I've been the building official, I have not had very many commercial properties with landscaping.
Right.
The 2500 Bee Cave Road PUD was already done and their landscaping was complete before I took over. I did have some landscaping for the remodel of 2700, but in general, they submit a landscaping plan. I go out and look at their plan and inspect it to make sure that it matches on site. For lighting, likewise, they submit a lighting plan. That one's a little more difficult because if somebody comes after the fact and takes covers off, it's going to probably be complaint based. If it's the permit's closed and somebody after the fact comes and takes those covers off. So if I get a complaint, I'm going to reach out to the owner, property manager, what have you, and just work with them to try to get compliance. I'm going to give them a period of time to come into compliance. And if they have not done so, then I'll start issuing citations. But generally, a friendly phone call takes care of that. And if not, we'll start citing them $2,000 a day till they fix it. And then for commercial properties for plans, I don't think that it was the practice in the past to require a final survey always. I do believe I have a final survey of 2500 Bee Cave Road, and it would be reasonable to request as-built surveys for commercial properties. For residential, that could be a bit burdensome. But for commercial projects, I think it would be completely practical to require them to submit final surveys.
The two PUDs that we have in Rollingwood, which is Mira Vista and Rollingwood Town Center, the Endeavor project at Bee Caves and Mopac, and the Mira Vista Shopping Center, both we required as-built surveys of the completed structures, plus we required as-built surveys of the utility lines. And I don't think we have that in an ordinance, but I would tell you, I would make a recommendation that we do that, because that ultimately you've tried to find utility lines. They're hard to find after a couple of years, and that sure makes it a lot easier if you have a survey and know where it is. It helps us, but it also helps the property owner also. So I think a recommendation that I would like to make is that we do require as-built utility surveys as well as as-built commercial surveys. I'm not as worried about the homes as I am the commercial buildings that we know.
That would be, as far as, my position with the city goes, it would be really helpful to have that. I think that would be a really great addition to the code.
So the other thing on that is, so I'm sorry, Brooke, you've raised your hand. Oh, David, you've already raised yours too.
No, Brooke was before me.
Oh, sorry.
I had a question in this same vein about whether the code allows you to assess a penalty for a violation of a building permit versus violation of the code. If for example, a commercial owner says, I commit to do X, Y, and Z as a part of my building plan, that is the incentive structure, say some kind of rain harvest system is in the building permit, it's not in the code. And so, Carrie, can you enforce a violation of a building permit in the same way you enforce a violation of the code? And if not, then I think we need to think about, for these incentives, that we put that in as part of what is a violation when in the code. That failure to meet the expectations for those incentives that are built into the building plan are also a violation that gets you the $2,000 a day fine. Does that make sense, Carrie?
I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble with the distinction. I mean, I'm looking at the code, or if there were a PUD agreement, the terms of the PUD agreement. If it's not a requirement of the code, it's not a requirement of the code. If you change your plans and they still fall within the code, you're required to submit plan revisions, which we review, and then they either meet code or they don't. So, I mean, I guess I'm not sure when you're talking about incentives.
Yeah. And Carrie, I can probably jump in here and kind of, because I think I know what Brooke's saying is basically, we talked about with the impervious cover having 55% impervious cover. unless you add water conservation, water quality controls, engineered water quality conservation, water quality controls, such as green roofs, rainwater harvesting, other water quality features that would basically make it perform as if it were 55% of pervious cover, which would be something that would be sealed by the engineer on the plan. So I think what Brooks getting at, and Brooke, jump in here if I'm interpreting what you're saying, is basically what happens if a developer comes in and says, yeah, we're going to develop to 65% pervious cover, but we're going to rainwater harvest, and it's like a commercial site, we're going to rainwater harvest everything, and that rainwater harvesting is basically going to have the effect of reducing our effective runoff and footprint. And then, during the course of construction, or you get to the CO or whatever stage, the developer says, yeah, we're not going to do that rainwater harvesting system. I think Brooke's question is, do you have the ability to issue a stop work order and enforce?
Yeah, so I would not issue a certificate of occupancy. So if they are saying that they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they haven't done that, and that was part of the condition of their, their engineering approval, then our engineers are going to see that, and they're not going to approve their engineered plans, and I'm not going to issue a certificate of occupancy.
My question is really, let's say the plan gets approved, it gets built, then they fail to maintain it.
Yeah.
And renders it inoperative. What do you have to address it then?
I would have to consult with the city attorneys on that. I'm not sure if it would be daily citation. That's probably what it would be. I'm sure that we do have an arm of enforcement if something's not, if it's violating those conditions, but I'm not sure precisely what that would look like legally.
Do you today enforce violations of building permits? If, let's say a fence falls down and someone builds it without a permit, I guess you'd probably need a permit for that.
I mean,
it's built,
yeah,
but then there's some change that is a violation of the building plan, but not a violation of the code. Other than the fact you haven't maintained or built according to you've altered your plan in a way that would now violate the plan or the code.
Well,
it's what do we do right now with some of the houses that have rainwater harvesting systems or rainwater tanks for drainage, that if they just say we're going to remove the tank and start flowing?
I mean, a certain level of this has to be, it's got to be reported to me. So I'm not going to go on somebody's private property 3 years after they've built their home and open up their harvest tank and see if there's silt at the bottom. You're required to construct and maintain those facilities. If, let's say we're talking about drainage.
Right.
It's a really, like any city, there has to be a certain level of, if there's an issue, it's getting reported by neighbors. I mean, I wish that I had a better answer for you.
Well, let me take a stab at this. From the PUD standpoint, we have provisions, a written agreement with the developers on those PUDs that says that you're going to not only build it to this, but you're going to maintain it to this standard on that for various things, like the retaining walls that Endeavor has, that Rollingwood Town Center has for that along Dry Creek. they're required to maintain those. So what if we said, and Ms. May cut to the chase, that yes, we give these incentives, but there is a contractual agreement signed with the city and the developer that says you will not only be able to, that you will be able to get this extra impervious cover, but you have to not only build this, these incentive items, but you have to maintain them as well.
I mean, that's already included in those and in the code. And that goes for commercial and residential. You're required to build and maintain them.
Well, on the bottom line, let's say I don't maintain, I come back and say, look, I'm putting in this tree canopy landscaping that's going to, my landscape architect tells me this will mitigate some of the drainage that's coming off of my site. And I want XYZ additional impervious cover because of that. I do that. Then I just don't maintain it. I let all the trees die. I don't water them. The city has the ability at that point to go in and fine me $2,000 a day today. They can do it under our code. And if I continuously refuse, you have a right to go in and revoke my occupancy permit of the building ultimately, if it gets down to that. I realize that's,
Yes.
hopefully we'll get down to it. But we have the ability today to, if I get that extra incentive, you have the ability to, if I don't maintain it properly, you have the ability to come in and fine me and ultimately take my CO if I don't do it. Is that,
Yes,
am I hearing that right?
you're spot on.
Okay, so that's a pretty big hammer to make sure we do that. And yes, I know you don't go by and make an inspection, but if I lived above a commercial development and it was not being maintained properly, I think you, Kerry, will hear from it about it. And I know you'll jump right on it and take care of it. So
That is correct. And those things have come up. I had one come up recently that we're working through right now. And ordinarily just a friendly phone call. People aren't aware of what has happened. Maintenance guy goes in, changes out a light bulb that, was maybe originally a kind of a low wattage bulb. They don't know. They go in, put a new bulb and it's too bright. Call the building maintenance person, and usually it's resolved really simply. But if it's not, then I can start issuing citations, and if those go ignored and that doesn't do it, I can start the process for revoking occupancy.
Right. Now let's talk about the drainage deal. So if I have a drainage feature that is capturing more water, and that turns out to be I don't maintain it properly, and either a neighbor or you drive by and look at it and go, hey guys, y'all got to clean this out because it's full of sediment right now, so it's not doing its job. David, this is really up your alley. If I have a water quality pond and I do not maintain it, what happens to me from TCQ?
Under the Edwards rules, really the same thing. You get fined for noncompliance.
And that's a state that goes.
That's a state, but also it would be essentially a double whammy because you'd have both the city from a drainage standpoint and the state TCQ from a water quality standpoint. In the case where you had a engineered water quality feature that wasn't being maintained, or wasn't functioning as designed.
Okay. Carrie, that's, those are pretty big hammers when it gets down to it.
Yeah.
Those are big hammers,
Yeah.
and I have had that come up where we have issued citations from the city side, and a citation, we also directed it to TCQ.
Right. And that's pretty typical. Hey, Tom, one other thing real quick I want to say is, kind of from the developer side of it, and I have contested more than one. $2,000 a day is hefty, it's significant, but particularly on the commercial side, the worst thing you can do to a commercial developer is issue a stop work order.
Yeah.
I mean, it is because it is a whole lot. I mean, that is the hammer because there are all kinds of, they're losing interest payments on their, the land loan, construction loan. But then also there's penalty provisions built in with the contractors and everything else. And, you want to get the commercial developer's attention really fast at stop work order. And I've, dealt with appealing them with the city of Austin. And it is, that's when the rubber meets the road and people are bending over backwards to do whatever it takes to get back in the good graces. The other thing I also want to echo, Tom, what you proposed and what Carrie was talking about, particularly on the commercial side, I think we should require as-built surveys on the back end of commercial construction because, one of the things about commercial construction is you have engineering firms, unlike residential. On commercial, you have engineering firms that are involved throughout that process who do the initial plans and sign and seal them. I think from a city perspective and from development services perspective, it would be nice. Not nice. It would be really, really a good thing to have a as-built survey that's sealed on the back end to put in the file. So, 5-10 years down the road, people know where utilities are, people know where everything else is, et cetera. So I 100% agree with that proposal.
It is almost always required by the bank
Yes, that's
for
true.
the developer to do an as-built survey. So it's not an additional cost on the developer. The other thing I was just going to say on the detention is a lot of cities require surety bonds for larger projects. I don't know if that's something you guys are doing or not.
We don't, and I will tell you that.
We do require bonds. We require insurance and bonding on all construction site.
Right. I think what, having dealt with this, what Sean's saying is, if I put a detention pond in the city of Austin, they require a surety bond that I maintain it. I will tell you that there is a separate department of many people at the city of Austin that run that department.
City of Austin watershed protection.
It is a absolute bear to keep up with all those deals, because if I get a bond or letter of credit, it's for a 1-year period. And so I have to extend it every year.
You're doing.
Yeah. And it's from a city staffing standpoint, we would have to have a separate department to do that, I think. Carrie, I have great respect for Carrie's ability to work, but giving her another full-time job is not something that I would see her do.
Thank you.
And David, just to echo what you said, I will tell you from experience, the single worst thing to happen on a stop work order is actually not the city. It is the fact that your subs won't come back.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. It just it's everything. I've never seen people more stressed out in their lives. So I mean that's the biggest hammer. I mean, it's in a $2,000 a day, violation fine that compiles every day, that's significant. But nothing will get your attention, particularly on a commercial project like a stop work order.
Let me, the one that I'm most concerned about is, Carrie, from your standpoint, is if I do let's say I do a green roof, and there's several different types of green roofs. There's actually in talking to my favorite landscape architect, Ann Coleman, she gave me two examples of green buildings that work on that. One is, of course, the green roof where you actually have vegetation on top. The other was vegetation inside the building where the rainwater fed the vegetation inside, and you had and she said that is actually becoming quite popular in a lot of different areas, not necessarily Austin, but a lot of different areas. So that's something that we may see come up, and that's fine as long as it does what it's supposed to do on that. Well, let me, Brooke, you've got your hand up. Is that?
Oh.
Oh,
Well, I want to take a look at the code and make sure that violations after a facility is constructed are subject to the penalty. But I think this is a good discussion.
yeah, and let me say this: if for some reason we're uncomfortable in any way with that, the penalties being there, there is the easy answer to me is, if you want this incentive, then you sign an agreement that says you're going to maintain it, and here are the penalties if you don't maintain it.
Right.
And that's an easy out if we don't have it. $2,000 a day and the potential loss of my CO is a pretty damn big hammer by itself. But if some reason we have any qualms about that, we can go back and say, okay, let's require a separate agreement that would occur on that and make that happen on that and get there. Let me ask you, Carrie, from a residential standpoint, we do have a drainage criteria manual that we have to follow when we're doing residential houses. So I put in an underground drainage system that collects the rainwater and drains out slowly over a period of time. I don't believe we have a way right now to ensure maintenance of those groundwater systems, do we? Unless I'm missing something.
Not that I'm aware.
I just don't know how we would be able to do that for residential. Commercial, it would be reasonably easy to do, I think, or easier to do, because you're dealing with a lot less properties. And they're going to be bigger, and they're going to be something. But residential, we don't have that kind of provision. Have we had any complaints from residents about residential drainage items that we put in for drainage that have failed or not being maintained, or any of that you've faced?
No,
Hadn't
I've
been-
not faced one of those.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good. I guess I don't want to make a problem that's not a problem, but that's been a concern of mine, that how we ensure that they stay maintained. I know when they put that in on the drainage criteria manual, it says that they're going to maintain it, but we don't have an annual inspection or anything that really does that. And I know it's not there because I was there when we wrote it, so I know that's not in there. And that was a touchy a long-term discussion that we went through with that. So
I know that we have an arm for enforcement if there was an issue that was reported to us. But I believe at this time it would be kind of complaint based. So.
Right. Well, let me kind of summarize this, make sure I understand where we are. If after reviewing this, the code, we decide that we do have a hammer on this from the standpoint of the maintenance part of this, then that should work for me, because that's a pretty big hammer. If we don't, or we have any qualms about it, then I would suggest we add that as a provision that there is a maintenance agreement in that, a separate agreement between the developer and the city of Austin if they want to have some incentives. I think either one of those work, but I want to make sure one of the other works to ensure that those stay in good working condition while if we give that variance. And this is perpetual. It doesn't mean that if you change owners or if you do something different, it's going to be to the property. So I've got I've got a good group of attorneys here. So I have to ask a question on that because that's been in the back of my mind. Is a property right addressed to the property or is it to the owner? Could Rollingwood put a provision that said, okay, if you change owners, you have to re-up the conditions or something like that? I may be asking the wrong attorneys. I know
Typically any provisions and it depends on what provisions, typically provisions dealing with ordinances, permits, regulations, et cetera, run with the land. Okay. And so basically they run with the land. So they are transferable from owner to owner. And that's something that, one of the ways to do it also is, if there's a special permit condition is to record it. Such that you don't have a notice issue with future buyers.
So we do that with banks, of course, because they get a special use permit, and there's been other special use permits we've issued.
Well, and like a good example is, TCEQ. So for instance, if you are the TCEQ rule, if you do a low impervious cover residential development and agree to stay for new residential development under 20% impervious cover out in the hill country, which exempts you from any other water quality provision, you have to file TCEQ files an agreement acknowledgement that this land is subject to that runs with the land to prevent other future landowners. So the answer is that it runs with the land.
Right. Well,
it requires a filing like a deed, and then it runs with the land.
Right.
Right.
So what we're going to do on this part of it is make sure, or I'll look at the code. Brooke, do you have the code, or would you like to get a copy from the city, or you can get that online, I suspect?
Yeah, online. Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
But I would like to add this provision that yes, and Sean, you're correct that lenders usually require an as-built survey to complete, but they do not require an as-built for the utility lines usually. And that's something that just comes back and helps the city later on to do that. And that's really not an expense when they're going in and putting that in to do that, as long as they know in advance to do it. It's a bear if they have to survey a line that's actually been covered up, because you have to uncover the line at certain points to resurvey it. But if you're doing it when you're doing that, that helps us from two ways. One is for future utility work that we may have to do. And two, it helps to ensure that they are maintaining that line within an easement. It does help the city to have that. That's something that I think would be a really good benefit for us 20 and 30 years down the line to know where these diagonal lines are. It also helps one call when we know where, if we're digging across there for any reason, we know where the lines are. We don't have to break them. So that's always been a helpful deal for me to see on that. Okay, so we will do that. I will kind of, the only thing that we'll check on that and kind of get through that. And I'm sorry, Diana, did you come back? I'm not seeing Diana. She must have to get off. I wanted to make sure that I met. Oh,
Can you hear me?
I got you. There we go.
All right. I got on about 4 minutes ago, and I have been trying like the dickens, and neither Wi-Fi nor telephone was working for me.
Oh,
But anyway, I have no idea what was said or what's been going on. I'll keep it short. My only concern was that given past history, that the residents have some means of redressing grievances for landscape not maintained, fences not maintained, visual barriers, whatever it is, that we had some redress other than the builder's goodwill. And no disrespect to you, Wally, or anybody else, but just the simple fact that, do we have any other options? And that was what I was looking at. So don't know how much of that you discussed, but I'll leave it to your judgment.
we actually went into it in great detail. And here's where we, let me give you the short summary. Carrie has the ability if somebody complains that something is not being maintained properly, we think that she has under the code the ability to issue a $2,000 a day fine for each day that it's not being in compliance, or ultimately to revoke a CO, so that they can't occupy the property if they don't comply. We are going to look at the code to ensure that that's true. If for any reason there's a question that it is not 100%, we're not 100% convinced that that's going to, that we have that authority, then if we grant a incentive, then we will have a separate agreement with the developer that would put those penalties in place and ensure that they do what they say they're going to do and maintain what they put in. So $2,000 a day each day, revoke the CO, either way that happens. And that includes landscaping, drainage features, fences, lighting, whatever on that. Anything that's being built there has to happen on that basis. Now, Carrie,
thank you very much for your consideration, and I'll be listening to it again later, but thank you for the quick summary. I appreciate it.
Right. And I think I hit the high points there, unless somebody has any comments that to add to that. But I think that covers what my concerns were, and just to make sure that we have the ability, if we give an incentive, we have the ability to ensure that it's not only built properly, but one other thing which I neglected to say, we are going to recommend that we get a as-built survey of both the building and the utility lines after construction. And that would ensure that we know what we've got and we know that it meets compliance 100% on that. So I think those are the issues that we discussed on that and where we came. And Carrie did a great job of kind of laying out how she handles it. And just as a side, David, if I had a choice between having TCEQ after me or Carrie after me, I think I would just take the TCEQ and go after it on that. Carrie's doesn't drop the ball on that. So anyway, Diana, I think that covers that. Unless you had any other questions, that's where we are.
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Tom.
You're quite welcome.
And everyone else.
Okay, I'm going to try to summarize our, what I need to do. Brooke, you wrote a nice email, which Ashley, if you make sure that both Sean and Patty get that, I would appreciate it. Sean, I'm going to give you a call in the morning. I've got a couple things I want to go over with you. And then we will have our next chapters that come in. Sean, next Monday, will we have our land use chapter, do you think?
Yeah, the future land use chapter.
Oh, you told me I'd have it this week. That's correct. Yes, great. Will you include in that any kind of economic analysis, or is that just going to be the land use deal?
Wait a second. Are you setting me up? Is this a joke? No. I was not planning on that.
Okay, that's something that it's a what if, I know on that, but it would do it. One of the things that I would like to include as an addendum to that future land use, we had one of our residents that came in and did she spent the time to do a rendering of a what if on a proposed development there. Didn't have a location, just showed what she thought that our residents would love to go shop at, a type of shopping center. And I think that as an example that you might include in there, I would like to include that. And if you don't have the ability to get that, I'll make sure you get a copy of that.
Yeah, please do. I don't know where I'd get that. That would be great.
And then we also had one other thing on the taxes and bonds and the financial part of that. We had a resident that put together a very detailed analysis of future income streams that would come from appreciation of residential properties within the city. And I would also like to include that as an addendum, but we need to put a caveat that is coming not from a paid third-party source, but coming from one of our residents who volunteered his time to do that. It's an excellent analysis. It's something that you would, have you seen that? I don't know if you have or not. If you haven't, I will make sure you get that. That is that's something that I think could be very useful for the city for long-term planning, but may not be useful for budgeting, but would be useful as a snapshot into the future, what you might look at. If I were a bond person, I certainly would look at it and make a consideration of that from our bond rating standpoint. Anyway, we'll make sure you get a copy of that. Ashley, if you don't have those, I'll be glad to get those for you because I do have them. And actually know where I can get them on my files. So that should help on that. Let's see, is there anything else that we were, let me look through my notes, make sure I don't have that, anything different. We're going to go with the 2019 data. I would suggest we just go ahead and use the map that we have. And then I will have Bowie do the analysis of the residential that we can include in there. And then I feel I would prefer to see a separate mobility section, since that's been something that many of our residents talked about, and also include in there the importance of our connectivity to our residential and commercial sections on that. So, and Sean, whatever you need on that, I'll visit with you on that, and we'll kind of talk about the mobility part of that. And we may have a bullet point draft available next Monday. And I would rather do it with bullet points, I think, first before we try to write up something, if you don't mind.
Okay. All right.
Okey-doke. Anybody have anything else on our, where we are or anything of these topics? If not, I'd like to meet again next Monday we should have 3 chapters to review, and hopefully we can get those done. We can get those in as quickly as possible so everybody can review those. And then we will have the rest of this data, and then I'll put on the agenda again the code versus agreement so that we make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about that. And
Okay.
then I will also put on the agenda about rear setbacks in regard to properties abutting city of Boston. So anything else that anybody would like to have on the agenda, just let me know. Okey-doke. And lastly, we have any other public comments we would like to accept? Anybody that would like to address us on any item we've had on the agenda or off the agenda? And I don't see any hands. So could I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you, Brooke. We have a second.
Second.
We have a second. Thank you, Ryan. And again, just keep your hand down if you're in favor. And I don't see any hands raised, so we are adjourned. Thank y'all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
And staff.